What happens when you don't want to own property with that person anymore? Welcome back to the All Things Real Estate Show. I am your co-host, Aaron Zapata, part of the Bald Brothers team.
I am the other part of the Bald Brothers team, Todd Anderson.
And we want to welcome you back and thank you for tuning into our show today. We know that your time is valuable. And as we get into this topic about owning property with somebody else.
With that other person.
We want to talk about how to handle that situation.
Yes, we are. This is the All Things Real Estate Show with the Bald Brothers team, and we talk about all things real estate. And a lot of times it's happy, fun stuff, and sometimes it's not so happy. And every once in a while you're in a position where you have gone into ownership on a piece of property with somebody that at one time you got into it, and you got into it because you were going to make a fortune. This is going to be the best deal ever. And
best deal.
You get into it and things change.
Oh, man, Todd, let's go in together. Let's buy that property. You put up half the money. I'll put up half the money, and it's going to be a home run.
Yeah, or sometimes it's you put up the money and I'll do all the work.
Yes.
Different types of scenarios, and those oftentimes lead to hard feelings, and maybe the economy changes and you're not in a position where it's profitable anymore.
Todd, I can't afford that water heater. I know we just put one in 3 years ago, but I can't do it again.
Yeah.
Well, what do you do in that situation? But before we answer that question, head over to our website at www.baldbrothers.tv, where you can watch this show. You can subscribe on YouTube. You can subscribe to our podcast. And while you're at it, go ahead and leave us a 5-star review if you find these topics helpful.
Yeah, and if you go to that website, at the top left, you can click at kind of our logo, and that'll take you to the main website as well. I had somebody ask that the other day. And then you can also call us. Old-fashioned method, it actually works where you can pick up the phone, dial a phone number, and somebody on the other end answers the phone, and that message gets to us. That's 833-305-BALD. That's 833-305-BALD. And maybe you're in a position where you're like, hey, that's me. I own property with a business partner or whatever the situation may be. Got to get out of it.
Todd, let's sing them our jingle. Just because, I'm in the mood. I'm in the singing mood. 833-305-BALD. 833-305-BALD. Give us a call. All right, there you go. For the special listeners.
All right. We apologize for that.
Yeah, we do. The singing Bald Brothers.
Please don't let that keep you from calling.
That's right. You know what? We try to make real estate fun and entertainment here on our show, but we do know that this is a serious deal. I mean, this is the biggest financial transaction that your family does, and you want to make sure that you handle it appropriately.
Yeah.
There are so many ways that real estate can go wrong. Mm-hmm. And even the best deal, the best prospect can become a burden, can become a situation where it no longer works. Now, we had kind of joked around about two friends going in together, but perhaps it's a family member, right?
That happens
a brother,
quite often.
A sister,
family member. I mean,
an uncle.
Let's face it. One of the obvious family relations, of course, is marriage. And marriages do sometimes end in divorce, but that's not always the situation. Oftentimes, family members will go into business together to purchase property, father, son, in-laws, and those can be very profitable and they can end up well, but we've also seen them in another position where it doesn't end so well, and then you end up with a little bit of a mess when it comes to what to do with the property and the assets that you have.
It does become a mess sometimes. In fact, this whole show was inspired by a phone call that I got from a friend of mine who is in business with another friend of his, and they went in together to buy a property to turn it into a short-term rental. Mm-hmm. You know, the famous name out there. Most people know what we're talking about. And it's going great, but it's not perfect. Mm-hmm. It's profitable, but it's just creating some friction. Mm-hmm. And so the question was asked, how do I end this but still keep the property? Mm-hmm. How do I end the relationship and still keep the property? So let's talk about a couple of different scenarios. And we often deal with divorce in Southern California. The divorce rate is really high, unfortunately. And so if you're going through a divorce and property is in play, we always recommend that if you're not going to buy out your significant other, your soon-to-be ex-partner, you do need to sell it early. Mm-hmm. We do know as professionals, and we've seen this too many times, where the property becomes the leverage point in the divorce proceedings. Mm-hmm. And because there's usually equity in the divorce, in the home, we know that this becomes the ball that gets tossed back and forth. And one wants to sell it, the other one doesn't want to sell it, and lawyers go back and forth, and it just eats up money in terms of attorney's fees.
We had one of those this year. That was just the same, that exact scenario. And the attorneys ate up so much of the profits, and you're right, absolutely right. If you can come to that agreement and sell that off early on, it makes things much easier. But, that does raise a question, because when it comes to the ownership of a property, there's different ways of vesting. Vesting basically means on title, how do the ownership rights appear? Typically, you've got your sole ownership if one person owns it. If it's a couple that owns it as part of their marriage, as a married couple that owns it, typically it's community property with right of survivorship. These are some terms I don't expect everybody to really know, but those are things that do come into consideration. But when you're perhaps not married, you have other types of vesting as well, and those also influence when you dispose of the property, or if you want to get out of it, and perhaps the other party does not want to. There's different options there as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. If both parties are okay with one or the other getting out, mm-hmm. then typically the one party that wants to keep it will buy out the other one.
Yes.
And there's a couple ways to accomplish that. You can do a cash out refinance, mm-hmm. where you can calculate the total amount of equity that is now owned by the individuals. Let's say that you have a property, it's worth $800,000. You have a loan amount of $400,000, and to do simple math, mm-hmm. you can take 800 minus 400. That's $400,000 in equity left over. Mm-hmm. Divide that in two. You'd have to say to the one party, I got to figure out how to give you $200,000 mm-hmm. to buy you out.
Yep.
Right now, in the real world, if you're going to sell that property, you would need to deduct the selling costs from that value, mm-hmm. and then split that in two.
Yeah.
So you divide commissions, divide closing costs, then you divide that amount in two. So it wouldn't be $200,000 per se in that example, but you've got to figure out how to make that possible. Now, if you don't have cash to just write the check and cash out that person, you will likely have to do a cash out refinance, mm-hmm. And pay that person their proceeds, and then you have 100% ownership. Mm-hmm. The good and bad about that is that if you have a joint loan where you've signed on it and that person has signed on it, doing a cash out refinance is usually the only way to get the person that's leaving the property off the title, mm-hmm. and off the loan. Mm-hmm. The last thing you want to do if you're the person walking away from this investment is to leave yourself tied to the mortgage that's associated with that property.
Yes.
So even though you've been cashed out, if you didn't get off the loan and the former partner then defaults, you can be in trouble.
Yeah, you may no longer have title to the home, but if you're on the mortgage, that's puts you in a really bad spot.
And you don't want to be in that spot.
You don't want. Hey, before we continue, let's let people know, if you're just tuning in right now, you're listening to the Bald Brothers team at Impact Properties. This is the All Things Real Estate Show, and we are talking about one thing real estate today, and that has to do when you want to get rid of property and you have co-ownership of a piece of property. If you want to give us a call, you can call us at 833-305-BALD. That's 833-305-BALD. You can also go to our website at baldbrothers.tv. That's baldbrothers.tv, as in television.
Right.
Baldbrothers.tv, and that takes you to a page where you can get to our website and subscribe to everything, all that good stuff right there.
And we would like to thank our sponsors.
Yes.
Beacon Escrow, Crosswalk Mortgage, and the others that are listed there on our website. This show is made in part by them, and we are grateful for the service they provide to our clients, and we definitely encourage you to look them up and to use them when and where possible.
We're thankful for our sponsors.
Absolutely.
All right, so where were we? Where did we live off?
Well, we were with an amicable, like, hey, I'm one works out, the other one doesn't.
I think you meant amicable.
I did mean that, but you know,
I'm gonna correct you this time.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Appreciate it. You know, good thing we don't have property together. Just kidding. Yeah. No, like, you know, things start off great and then they end up going sour. So if you have a situation where both parties cannot agree, mm-hmm. perhaps they just can't agree to an amount.
Yeah.
They can't agree to a process, One party wants to keep it, the other one wants to sell it. Usually the only answer is to sell it and to liquidate the property.
That, in most cases, I mean, your cases might be different, but in most cases, that is the easiest way to do it. And there's a process for that as well.
Yeah, so when you're in that process, you can't come to an agreement, you're just going to have to sell it. Now, we do have a question sheet that we would love to offer you. So if you go to our website and you subscribe to our email list and you request the 30 questions to ask before you buy property with friends or family,
yes,
we will send that to you. Because a long time ago, this was almost a decade ago, I had these same questions. This is not a new question. You want to ask these questions, and I've written them out. Questions like, who's going to pay for what? How are you going to take title? How are you going to exit this relationship? And keep that in mind when you're thinking about buying property with somebody, that you always have to have the end in mind.
Yeah, and that is something that most people don't ever think about.
It's always going to work out, Todd.
Yeah, it's just going to work out.
We're best friends.
Yeah, no, you have to have some sort of plan for exiting.
That's right.
Exit strategy.
Yeah, so you definitely want to take a look at this question list so that you are familiar with and really think through the ideas and think through the process before you commit to buying property with somebody else. So the other thing to think about if you're going through a divorce, we're kind of hopping all over today, but
we are.
You know, that's okay.
That's kind of what we do.
That's kind of what we do. So we talked about the fact that the property can become the leverage used in the relationship. And so we do recommend that you sell early rather than later. And you also, even in a divorce situation, need to be very aware of the possibility that you have to get your name off the mortgage. You know, whoever is being left with the property should have sole ownership and should have sole responsibility for any mortgage that's associated with that property. And sometimes it's just not possible. You know, we're talking about these voluntary, yes, I can do that. Yes, I'll buy you out. But if it's just not possible, you're just going to have to sell.
Yeah. I had a scenario, this goes back a few years, somebody had reached out. It was actually a family member who had reached out to me because she had actually co-signed on the mortgage for a property. And this is a scenario that we just talked about. She co-signed for a mortgage and then ended up deciding that she did not want to live with them any further. And she ended up deeding the property back over to them, but she did not take her name off the mortgage. She wanted to now purchase property. And she was in a position she couldn't purchase the property. And it became a big, big issue. She had to go back to them and try to redo it. It became a kind of blew up in that scenario because she came back to them and wanted to get her name off the mortgage, and it became a big old deal. So just a kind of a real life example to illustrate the point of how this really can affect you if you don't take care of those preliminary issues.
Well, and that also brings up a scenario that I have heard of where, and it's not uncommon these days, where mom and dad provide the down payment and then want to live with the children. Or sometimes they just provide the down payment and they expect repayment. You know, anytime there is an exchange of money between parties, the nature of the relationship changes. Dave Ramsey says that. He says once $1 is exchanged between two parties, the nature of the relationship changes. It's never the same. And so if you are accepting a down payment from a property and then your parents or grandparents move in with you, right, into this home, then that's also going to change the nature of the relationship. And although you may be 100% owner on title, 100% owner on the mortgage, there may be an unspoken expectation that there is control. And so those situations are the situations that you do need to ask yourself ahead of time. Because it is not fun when you are working through these scenarios.
That's right. You know, that reminds me, Aaron, I have a question.
I may have an answer.
Can I borrow some money?
If it's $1, I'm just going to give it to you.
You're just going to give it to me? Okay. I don't have to sign off on it?
You don't have to sign off
on it. Do I owe you
it.
anything for that dollar?
You don't. I'm just going to give you the buck. Okay. the buck stops here, though. No more money.
No more
after
bucks.
the dollar. It's
just
done.
$1, and that's it.
That's right.
Hey, you are listening to the Bald Brothers team. This is All Things Real Estate.
Yes,
the All Things Real Estate show with the Bald Brothers team. We are Todd and Aaron and Todd, and you can reach us at 833-305-BALD. That's 833-305-BALD. You can also go to our website at baldbrothers.tv to get all of our contacts, our websites, subscribe, and you can also sign up to receive, what is that? 30 questions to ask.
Before you buy property with family or friends.
Yes, with family or friends. Not 29, not 31, 30 questions.
30 questions. I thought that was a good number.
It's a very good number.
Probably more questions.
There's probably more, but 30 at least gets you on the way.
That's right. All right, Todd. I think we have talked enough about that subject for today.
Let's move on.
Because every situation is unique. We're going to have listeners that say, man, I'm really going through that right now. I better call these guys. Yeah. Call us. We want to hear about your scenarios.
And we are not advising you
that's true.
over the radio waves or podcasts or whatever. We're not your advisors. We're telling you what we know about real estate. We would actually have to have a relationship, a working business relationship with you for us to be able to advise you. And for that, you can call us.
That's right.
You know what the number is?
833-305-BALD.
That's right.
Okay, so did you know, I'm asking you, Todd, I'm asking our listeners, did you know that your realtor can make or break your chances of getting an offer accepted? I'm not.
That is true.
I am not joking.
That is, we have experienced it many times.
Who you work with matters. Give us.
It's very true.
This recent exchange of information that you had.
You know, Aaron and I have a lot of experience with this because we work primarily with sellers. So that means that we get to see a lot of buyers coming through, writing offers on our property. We talk to a lot of realtors. And
in fact, Todd, in the last 12 months, we have looked at over 900 offers.
That's exhausting.
It is.
We've spoken to, so we had a deal recently where there was a multiple offer situation. In fact, we had 7 offers on this property. And the offer that seemed to be the winning offer, they wrote the best offer. It was a cash offer. It was a sweet deal. And then we had other offers come in. And we issued a counter offer, and the other offers came up to match that offer. When I talked with the realtor, she knew that she was up against competition with other buyers. She started asking questions saying, my buyer's worried about this and worried about that.
And worried about this and worried about that.
Worried that such and such isn't permitted and they're going to be fined and the neighbors are going to find out. She started, before we were ever even in contract, and she started bringing up all these things that the buyer was concerned about. And you know what that tells me as a listing agent, as selling, is that, oh my goodness, this could be a problem if we open escrow with this buyer. Now, this looked on paper like a great deal. But after the realtor told me way too much before we actually got into contract, I advised, and we both advised together to our seller, we probably should not open escrow with this cash buyer. Although it looks sweet on paper, it's not so sweet when you talk with them.
Well, and we have a fiduciary duty to the client we represent.
We do.
Okay, and so if our seller was not given this information to make a good, full, informed decision, we might be opening escrow with a buyer that's going to cancel.
That's right.
And so as the agent who represents the desires and the best, the fiduciary duty of our client, we have to give this information.
And, we would have loved to have a quick cash close. And the seller would have loved that as well. But at the end of the day, it does no good if they're going to fall out or they're going to ask too much. Ultimately, it's the seller's decision. And so we left the seller with that decision, but we gave them that information. And of course, they immediately said, no, we'd rather open escrow with a buyer that seems to be more serious. And actually, the very issues that this buyer was worried about, I checked with the other agent, and that other buyer said, I don't care about that.
Right. And so that begs the question, Todd, as the listing agent, should we be concerned about those questions, and should we withhold information? Now, we should never withhold information.
No.
Right? We know that the specific property has an unpermitted sunroom addition.
And we disclosed that from the very beginning.
Disclosed.
We fully disclosed all of that.
Which is why that conversation became a conversation. But the buyer's agent also has a duty to his client to protect the intention and the will of their client. And I felt, and so did you, which is why we're talking about it, that the agent's demeanor and willingness to basically, expose the worried side of the buyer really did a disservice to her client. Extremely.
Yes.
Extreme disservice.
Because what I found out later is that the client was devastated that their offer wasn't accepted because they really, really wanted the property. But she did a disservice to them because she created fear from the side of the seller that were to the point that we never even were willing to open the contract with them.
Well, and it's okay to ask those questions. Is the room permitted?
Yes. And she should ask those questions. Those are questions that she should have asked, but then intimating all of the fears and anxieties of her client to the seller before we ever even open escrow, that did not work in the favor of her client. And so it is very possible, and it happens all the time, where an agent, whether it's a listing agent or a buyer's agent, gets in the way of the transaction. We've seen it time and time again.
And Todd, you and I have talked about this so much. It is a really hard when a good transaction gets blown up by a bad agent. And you and I try not to be that person. We will hold information that we do not have permission to share, because that's also the case. If we represent a seller, the seller's motivation, where they're moving, all those things are confidential.
Those are confidential. We cannot share that unless the seller
specifically says,
either gives us permission or even asks us to share information. But no, we cannot share that information.
And the same thing with the buyer. The buyer's agent should not willingly give over information like that's going to cause harm to her or his client when, winning an offer in a bidding war. And it's sad for us when you look at it and think, wow, that buyer was really devastated. But the agent did not convey the right amount of, anxiousness or whatever it was. It just really, really spoiled the whole procedure for us with that specific client.
And there's a fine line, because the agent does have to protect their client, and the agent should bring up issues to the client. But if it's not important to the client has expressly stated that it's not important to them, the agent needs to be careful. We actually had another one several months ago where we were in contract, and there were several items that came up in the inspection report. And the agent made all these requests. Now, this got back to me through the seller, because the buyer somehow had contact with the seller. I think it was maybe over there for an inspection. And the buyer said to the seller, I don't care about all these things. But the agent made it a big deal in the request for repairs, and it jeopardized the transaction when the buyer had actually told the seller. Now, normally the buyer does not have direct contact with the seller. This was one of those weird situations. And it came back to me. And so an example where sometimes the agent, trying to be a hero, or it tries too hard to be relevant. Sometimes the most important thing is to take a step back when your client has already told you what's important to them.
Word of the day for that whole conversation: be careful with your words.
Yes.
And the agents that work for you need to work for you, not against you. So make sure you have a great relationship. Make sure you have a candid, open relationship, but make sure they know what they are and are not supposed to talk about to the other parties involved. It can blow your deal. So these are two important topics that we covered today: whether or not you are getting rid of a property, you are splitting ways, or you are working with a client, working with an agent, and they are communicating on your behalf. We appreciate your time today. Todd, any last closing remarks, words of wisdom before we end the show?
Words of wisdom, boy. Don't chew with your mouth open.
Okay.
Be kind, rewind.
Be kind.
That's
rewind.
dating me.
It surely is. But you know what? We're up to date on selling real estate.
That's right.
We do appreciate your time here today. Head over to baldbrothers.tv and you can find all of our contact information. And again, we appreciate your time today. God bless, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to the All Things Real Estate Show. The Bald Brothers team is a licensed DBA of Impact Properties, Inc., licensed by the California Department of Real Estate number 019226671. Again, we do not give any real estate, legal, or financial advice, and we do encourage you to seek the advice of the proper professionals. If you'd like to reach us, you can call us at 833-305-BALD, or you can reach us online at baldbrothers.tv. Equal housing opportunity.